Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. So today we have tackled the future of mobility. We've talked about the future of trade, our digital future. So why not tackle the future of the United Kingdom as well? Post-empire, post-Brexit, post-pandemic. While it holds on to monarchy, but also thinking about its place in the Commonwealth as well. We've got too many authors here on stage, so I can't quote any of you. But I was perusing my former professor Paul Kennedy's book on the rise and fall of great powers. Came across Napoleon's words, "My power depends on my glory, and my glory is on the victories I have won. My power will fail if I do not feed it on new glories and new victories. Conquest has made me what I am, and only conquest can enable me to hold my position." Where does that leave us? And then there was Henry Kissinger's comment that the beginning of wisdom in human as well as international affairs is knowing when to stop, right? So, what should the UK be doing more of now, and what should it stop doing? We have a fantastic panel. I'll give a more in-depth introduction to each of you in just a moment, but please do welcome Lord Jonathan Marland. We have Dr. Tristram Hunt. We have Baroness Usha Prashar here. Happy birthday, by the way.
Yeah.
The world knows now.
And Honorable Dr. Shashi Tharoor, thanks very much for joining us. So, first question, very broad, but we'll ask for some pithy answers, and we'll just pick up the conversation as we go. What is your vision, Lord Marland, for Great Britain? How should it represent itself now?
Well, I think it's much more important the Prime Minister has a vision for Great Britain than me, to be honest.
And does he?
And I'll take any suggestions on a postcard because I don't have them. But I think, broadly speaking, the Prime Minister's got to lay out a vision for the future of Britain. It needs to include how Britain are going to be 10% more competitive than Europe and America in terms of regulation, in terms of taxation, to make it a very good place to do business, to make a good place for trade. It has some fundamental good things about it, the Victoria and Albert Museum, of course, but it has a pretty secure, touch wood environment. It has a very strong rule of law, and these are fundamental things for business people and for people coming to this country, not just business people, to do it. And also, we've got a fantastic cricket team, and we're going to beat the SHIT out of India on Friday. So I think,
words.
Sorry, that's too long. But I've said enough, I know. You're about to cut me off in my head.
All right. Tristan, what would you add to that? What do you make of this phrase, global Britain?
I like the phrase global Britain. I think Britain should have this sense of its kind of cosmopolitan place in the world. Britain has had a long trading and cultural history with many parts of the world, not least South Asia. I would agree with everything Jonathan says, and then I'd add the importance, along with the hard power that we're seeing at work supporting Ukraine at the moment, the importance of UK soft power. We are a very, very creative island, and whether it's music, whether it's drama, whether it's literature, whether it's museums, whether it's film, Britain has this great reach and strength. And my worry, sitting where I do at the Victoria and Albert Museum, is that policymakers don't give enough support to the long-term demands to kind of keep that going in terms of our education policy, that we have to keep that creative impulse at the heart of what we seek to do around the world, because we're very, very good at it.
Interesting. So having promised to give you guys a longer intro, I completely blew past those, but so I'll come back to your longer intros in a moment. Honourable Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament for, here we go, I'm going to be able to say it, Thiruvananthapuram.
Very good.
Not bad, not bad. Third term in the Sabha. Also former Undersecretary General at the United Nations and the author of many books, including Inglorious Empire, What the British Did to India. So not always shall we say you're a friend at times of the UK, or a critical friend. But tell us, what do you think your vision for Great Britain should be?
Well, look, I mean, I think those who advocated Brexit had sort of two kinds of vision, both of which involved opening up Britain to the world, hence global Britain. One was the somewhat fatuously named Empire 2.0, which would have been a disaster since Empire 1.0 was such a bad idea in the first place. But the other was Singapore on the Thames. And I
Right.
think Singapore on the Thames is still a rather nice idea, because if you can be this open economy with agreements, trade agreements with various countries and so on, and I like Tristram's soft power argument, the British Council should perhaps be given more resources along with the BBC to get some of that soft power out there. I can see a global Britain trading on equal terms with give and take with partners around the world.
Interesting. So let's pick up on a couple of things, Baroness. So just to give you your full introduction, crossbench peer, House of Lords, director and chair of a variety of public and private organizations, and actually was the first chair of the Judicial Appointments Commission and sat on the Iraq inquiry. There was a mention there of promoting democracy. So I wonder what role, we have Ukraine at the moment, the war in Ukraine. Give us a thought on what role the UK can play in that sense.
I mean, from my point of view, going back to the question about global Britain, and I will come back to the question of democracy, I think Britain has always been global. You know, seafaring nation, of course, it had an empire, and post-Brexit, I think it's at a cusp in a way. You know, it's trying to define its role, what it needs to be, and I think the potential is phenomenal, because I think we've already heard the question of the soft power. I don't like the term soft power.
Why is that?
Because it's neither soft nor power, and I think it was invented well after Britain actually saw its soft power, because the British Council you mentioned was set up in 1934. It was to actually promote the soft power of UK. So I think Nye Bevan invented the word, and we sort of jumped onto it, but I think Britain had that vision in terms of its role going forward. And I think it has a real role to play in terms of connecting democracies, promoting its values and so on. But having said that, I do think that we are at a cusp. It could go either way, because you cannot promote values of democracy if you don't cherish them in your own country now. So I think our democracy does, in some ways, looks a little jaded at the moment. But I think we've got to make sure we sustain that, actually have that moral authority to have the convening power.
Jaded democracy, Lord Marland. And just to bring that, let me give you your full introduction. Chairman of Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council. You were the Prime Minister's trade envoy, Minister for Energy and Climate Change, Business, Innovation and Skills. So talk us a little bit through what your views are on Brexit now. A few years on, it's not necessarily going that well for many of us, but tell us what opportunities we might be able to see coming through now.
Well, I mean, the first thing, just picking up on the democracy point, which was it is a big question, is democracy dead? There is very poor leadership throughout the world. The Ukraine situation has put a real dividing line through democratically elected nations, normally would combine together support and endeavour behind democratically elected countries against a horrendous invasion, but haven't done. So I think democracy in almost every country I know is under real threat. Short-term political thinking, short-term political decision-making in order to win the next election has become a real millstone around politicians' necks. As far as Britain is concerned, I agree with Tristan. I always agree with Tristan, funny enough. Is that Britain are incredibly well placed for all manner of reasons, some of which I enunciated earlier. We are a multicultural country. We have strong ties with many countries. People like to visit here because we're a reasonably tolerant society. And I think the foundations are there to do it. What we need now is a political drive and a political will to really give the Brexit dividend some of the things I mentioned earlier. And that has got to happen, or else we'd let it go. It has been difficult. Let's not pretend. COVID has been a phenomenally awful time. We've lost lots of loved ones, and our thoughts go out to them now. But COVID has put a stop on so much endeavour and so much initiative. And I think it's going to be business in the end, and business people in this room here, who are going to really galvanise the world to get back to a semblance of working order. And Britain as a free trading economy, and other countries as free trading economies, will prosper very well because that is their determination. Those countries that aren't are going to suffer.
Shashi, if we go back to that democracy point and the UK's value in terms of promoting, did you see that when you were at the United Nations? Did you often sidle up to the UK ambassador and say, I just need your help in something over here? Did you see that power?
You sidled up to me a few times. So no, look, the truth is democracy is rather like love. It has to come from within. The best you can do is have the candlelight and the romantic music, but you're not going to be able to promote democracy to people who are not able to be democratic by instinct. And that's part of the problem, the flaw with the notion of democracy promotion. And I say this fully conscious of the fact that India was actually a larger contributor to the UN's Democracy Fund than Britain was. In fact, oddly enough, the US, India, and Australia were the big contributors to the UN's Democracy Fund, which did, in fact, attempt to promote democracy in various places with varying degrees of success. I think ultimately people will have to find their own systems of democracy and operate them to the best of their national genius. I'm not sure we're doing a terribly good job of that in India today. So it varies, but I'm not sure that Britain should take on this mantle of democracy promotion. It should be available should a country that's trying to be a democracy need help or advice or counsel or even assistance. But I think making it part of your flagship thing will again reek of the rather unfortunate civilizing mission that some late Victorians thought they were taking upon themselves to countries that have been civilized a long time before Britain was.
Baroness, do you want to come back on that?
I do, because I agree with you up to a point, but I think it's not kind of trying to implant democracy as they tried to do in Afghanistan or Iraq, but it's a question of the values that actually underpin democracies. And I think Britain can have that convening power because in a sense that it has over the years, through a soft power, had values. Because when I was a British Council, one of the things which was constantly said to me, they would want Britain to teach education simply because the values underpinned by that. So I think coming together in that sense is quite important. I mean, you're right. I mean, we can't impose and take the flag and say, we become democratic. But I think what Britain has to do is, with humility, be the convening power and promote the very values which will nurture democracies in these countries.
When asked by others.
Well, of
and
course.
by the way, on soft power, you should know the Alliance Française was established in 1870.
Yes,
the French beat you to it.
Of course I do. I know it is. But I just feel that we jump onto it because Joseph Nye coined it.
That's right, of course.
But
Just
started.
I feel that soft power is getting a bad look in here. Come on, let's stand up for what culture can do.
Yeah, I mean, on the democracy point, in which soft power plays a really important part, there is, for better or worse, institutional knowledge within the UK, because over the course of the 20th century, the UK, through colonialism and then post-colonialism, was writing, tens, if not hundreds, of written constitutions around the world. And they forgot to do one for the UK, but this was so. In terms of, as it were, civil society and structures connected to civil society, there's a prehistory there. But also, I think there's scaffolding that can be supplied for an ecology of democracy, and that's about a free media, it's about free institutions, it's about well-functioning businesses, it's about the rule of law, it's about the judicial, and if you put all that in place, then you're giving democracy more of a chance. But we have to watch ourselves at the same time. We've seen what happened in America, where democracy, A, almost fell, and B, seems under a great deal of strain. And I think Jonathan's right. There's a kind of backwash against it at the moment. So without sort of overhyping the role of a museum of decorative arts, but the role of museums, whether it's the British Museum or the V&A or other institutions such as the House of Lords, are really important, because democracy is more than about a single vote at a single point. And that was always the kind of cancer of referenda, because they're incredibly divisive. They're sort of notion of a pure democracy, which then I think has terrible long-term consequences for the ecology of democracy, which we're dealing with, I think, in the UK at the moment.
Anything to add there, Jonathan?
Well, no one can add to a great voice like Tristram.
Let's move on to a free trade deal. You've thought a lot and quite deeply about trade. What do you think, Lord Marland, that a free trade deal between the UK and India really needs to have in order to make a significant difference for how we reimagine the UK-India relationship?
Well, it inevitably has to have a bold vision and serious trust on both sides. I'm very sceptical about trade deals on the whole. I advise the Prime Minister we'd never do a trade deal with America, which is going to be this panacea. Anybody who's dealt with the US FDA knows they're always going to try and better you, and we would inevitably come off worse from it. And I think that could be the problem with India. It's, you know, the principles.
What are you worried about?
Well, I'm worried about the Indians' approach to a trade deal. You know, I think the officials, the principals will, you know, grandstand and say we've done a great deal with India, and by the end of it, it'll be quite a narrow trade deal, which will be very complicated, and I'm afraid will end up in difficulties with the Indian bureaucratic system. Sorry to be frank about it, but that's just a point of view. So I think it's fraught with difficulties, and it's perhaps not the moment in time when it should be done. I think time needs to elapse where there's greater trust at a political level between both countries, and therefore there's much more positivity and an openness to it.
Shashi, I'm reluctant to ask you to speak on behalf of the government of India, but since you're coming to us from India, what would you say in return? Are we going to see a disappointing free trade deal?
Yeah, I think Jonathan's skepticism is warranted in the sense that there has been a history of very protectionist approaches by the Indian government and the Indian bureaucracy, but we've been hearing some very positive noises from all those involved in the negotiations, both in Delhi and, as you saw today, right here. So people seem to be suggesting that some of the entrenched resistance is melting away. It's a challenge for another good reason, which is while, as we heard from the Diageo CEO, Britain has lots of whiskey and other goods to sell to India which could benefit from significant tariff reductions. India doesn't have that much more to offer Britain than Britain's already buying, and so what India can really offer is services, is people. And there the resistance here to visas, work permits and so on needs also to be overcome. So there's got to be a bit of give on both sides. And I think we may or may not be there. I think Jonathan speaks
How do
from
you get
experience.
over that resistance?
The visa issue is always going to occur on these things, and it's always going to be a problem.
How do you get through that resistance, though? I mean, we need people
know,
here,
India
right?
is a massive population. If you open the floodgates, this is the concern over here, you know, a small island finds it very difficult to cope. It's perhaps a small island mentality. We employ Indians. We love working with them, and they're phenomenally hard working and etc. I employ an Indian any day because of that. So it's a shame that we don't have this freedom of movement. But you can kind of understand the government that of being cautious about it.
What do you think, Baroness, that we could see from a wider cooperation between the UK and India? What would make a difference in a free trade deal? We know the concerns about visas. We know the concerns about bureaucracy and lack of trust. But what do you think would make a serious difference in order to make the relationship stronger?
I think what we need to do is not just look at it in a transactional way, because when you look at a trade deal, it's not transactional. I think what we got to build is this trust and understanding, and obviously it's not something we can hark back to the imperialistic relationship that we had with India. India's moved on, UK's moved on, so we've got to create a new kind of relationship, and I think building that trust at people-to-people level, may that be through creative industries, through diaspora, and so on. And I think building that kind of relationship is going to be quite important going forward, because if you make cultural links, you make people-to-people links, you really understand, and I think you understand modern India, then I think the trade deal will actually be easier to manage. Because at the moment, I think there's a lot of hype. People say the stars are aligned, and I'm not as pessimistic as Jonathan. I think we may get a kind of a broad outline of free trade deal, but I think it's the details, the devil is in the detail. It's the details which will actually make the difference. But I do think that as two democracies, which are willing to come together, and geopolitically that relationship is very important. So I just think that we've got to look at it from that perspective. But I, for one, really think we've got to build that trust, and people-to-people relationships really has to underpin this. If you see it purely as a transactional relationship, it will not last. I think that's what happened in Europe, because, you know, in my work I did in Europe, Britain saw a relationship with the UK, with Europe, purely transactional. And they did not have that emotional commitment that the Europeans had post-war. And I think that's really what happened. You know, the break came.
Can I just add to Sashi's point, which is a very good one, about services, because services aren't included in trade deals. And that is the big connection, connectivity, and works extremely well, doesn't it? So, I mean, that's a fundamental point. So there is a big trade deal with India, and it doesn't need to be written down in paper because it exists.
Tristram, how do you collaborate with museums in India? How do you, I imagine you don't need a free trade agreement to do that. Tell us how you collaborate and what you've seen as a result of that.
Well, I think this is a really exciting moment for museums in India. I think there's a sense that, first of all, wealthy individuals now who historically have always supported schools and hospitals and their communities are now also thinking about collections, and they're thinking about museums. So there are more private museums operating. And then I get the sense, both at state level and federal level, that there is a new enthusiasm and understanding for the importance of museums. And so whether there's going to be elections, I know, in Mumbai, and part of the process around that is thinking about the museums in Mumbai, which, you know, need investment and support. And then, of course, there's the Grand Projet, the 8th Delhi arising in terms of the transformation of New Delhi, and with that, new museums in the North and South Secretariat blocks. And so I think there's a real space for partnership and collaboration between UK and Indian cultural institutions and museums. And for us, we're excited by that, but we're also learning a huge amount, for example, from the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore, which is showcasing new approaches to digital understandings of collections and showcasing them in a much more nimble and effective way. So in a sense, the museums of, you know, India is leapfrogging some of the kind of historic components of traditional Western European museums and thinking much more sort of creatively and collaboratively in the physical and digital space at the same time. So I think this is a really rich and exciting area for us.
It'll be even more exciting if you send some of your things back to India.
Well, you say that, Shashi, but I think it's so important that people coming to London and people coming to Paris and people coming to Delhi and people coming to Mumbai, see all these great collections, but also people here understand the brilliance of the tradition of making and design and craft in South Asia. The worst thing that can happen in the world is that you know, all of your museums are just telling your national story. And the wonder of the British Museum is that, you know, as it were, the British components are there as part of this much richer and global story. So we are always up for sharing our collections much more collaboratively in a spirit of partnership. But I think one just has to be careful of losing sight of the importance of museum collections for that cosmopolitan ideal of citizenship, which we all believe in.
Yeah.
One of the better answers I've heard.
Thank you very much.
So we don't need.
Not that I agree,
I
but
absolutely agree with it.
So we don't need to send the Kohinoor back. It's absolutely fine to watch.
he's also got Tipu Sultan's tiger mauling a British red coat.
Yes, no, the Tipu's tiger is a work of great wonder. But so Tipu's tiger is a very interesting object because this is an Anglo-French Indian object. That this is a wind-up wooden automaton commissioned by the great Tipu Sultan, Tiger of Mysore, depicting a British officer having his neck ripped open by a tiger, and the tiger is
Who here has seen it? Has everyone here seen it? You know what it is? It's rather magnificent.
It's brilliant, but it's a story of the interaction between colonizing forces in South Asia, resistance to them, and then the organ within it is made by, we think, French engineers. So this is a cosmopolitan entity, which tells these global stories.
Which reflects Indian cosmopolitanism at its finest.
Exactly.
And therefore belongs where Tipu Sultan had it to show visitors.
But there's a very strong case. We get equal representation from citizens and activists in Pakistan, that it should be in Pakistan, not... you see?
Sorry, Tipu Sultan is several thousand kilometers away from Pakistan.
I know, but you see, these objects have complicated lives.
No, not this particular object, I can assure you.
Baroness, you agree, though, that the objects should stay here?
Well, what I agree with is this cosmopolitan space, because I think we need to move on from this debate, because I think what Tristram was saying earlier, it's this better collaboration and it's mutual learning which is now taking place. You know, I mean, what you were saying in terms of the learning you're taking from the museum in Bangalore. So I think from my point of view, it's very important that we actually broaden the debate, and the time has come for collaboration, cosmopolitan approach. You know, we can have fun in terms of saying, you know, let's send these things back, and you know, we can laugh about these things. But I just think we got to move the debate on, because the artifacts, as you say, have a long history. And to me, the fact that Kohinoor is where it is, you can tell the history when people come. It stays there. And it only when we had the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, there was a program on BBC, and they took the whole history of the Kohinoor. So it actually was explained why it's there, and it needs to be there. And I think the same needs to happen for others, because otherwise...
I mean, Shashi, I can see you squirming in your seat to get in there.
It needs to be there, as sort of, you know, there it is, an object of theft sitting in the place where the burglar put it.
Precisely.
To my mind, that's why it's here.
Precisely.
And so when you go to the Tower of London and you see it there on the
It's there.
Queen Mother's tiara, you realise that this is the absolute symbol of British colonial loot.
Well, exactly.
That's why it sits where it doesn't belong.
So the point is, why do you want to send it back? It tells the story. No,
And you told that story with it, yes.
It's because if it goes back, you know, you will not be able to tell the story of colonialism.
But the problem is it implies you're saying to these Indians, you know, come and see what our grandparents stole from your grandparents.
No, precisely.
I mean, that's essentially...
Precisely.
And you charge them money for it, too. So it's easy to get into the Tower of London.
Maybe we can waive the fee.
We're waiting on our idea. I wanted to make sure we entertained with this particular debate. So, but I want to come back, Lord Marland. Let's think about the Commonwealth, because we've really touched on empire here. What role does the Commonwealth play now? What role should it play?
Well, the Commonwealth is at a crossroads because several things. UK government has not funded the Commonwealth institutions during their term in office. They've spent quite a lot of time battling to change the Secretary-General, which has not been successful. In the old days, the Commonwealth would have come together with one voice, and it certainly hasn't done over things like Ukraine. It's becoming less. We've just had 2 new countries join, Togo and Gabon, which are sort of kind of outside the Commonwealth family, in that your first language was always English, was one of the reasons for being in the Commonwealth, that you had connectivity through that. Neither Gabon or Togo fit into that. I welcome them, of course, because it's more countries for us to benefit from. But it is at a crossroads, underfunded institutions, too much of a talking shop, not enough action. I accept my own organisation, which is thankfully going from strength to strength because people still believe in trade. And I'm afraid to say India is not coming to the party as it should do to really make it work. The Commonwealth could be a really good buffer to the Chinese invasion, as I've said, commercial invasion, I should say. We have been asleep on our watch in terms of Commonwealth countries allowing China to start to dominate them, both commercially and through accessing their resources.
Could there be a Commonwealth free trade area?
There could. It would be at different levels, in that, you know, not every Commonwealth country is a free trade country. But you could start a Christmas tree of, say, 10 Commonwealth countries who believe in free trade and want an open free trade, and let other countries of the 56 join when they have adopted it. I mean, we now have Rwanda, a free trade company, Botswana, Namibia, of all adopting free trade. There's a African free trade agreement, which has happened unbelievably quickly and is so exciting. But having just come back from chairing the Commonwealth Business Forum in Rwanda, it was very disappointing that there were very few Indians there, a couple of handfuls. There were 1,700 people. All of Africa was there. What an opportunity. A lot of British, I'm glad to say. And it was a terrific event. I mean, it's very rare that you get 20-odd heads of state, royal family, 1,700 delegates from 62 countries, president of FIFA, chairman of the World Bank, a World Health Organization, the African Development Bank, the African Export Bank, 20 heads of state, multimillionaires, billionaires. I mean, there are only 2 forums in the world that can attract this, and the Commonwealth still does it. And I really do think, message back to home, for those of you who've come from India, that you should be attending events like that. It is bereft without you, because India is represented by people in all of Commonwealth countries. They have lots of businesses in them.
Right.
They bring dynamic and change to all those countries, as you do as people.
Okay.
And we need you to engage. Sorry.
No problem. Final one thing, one word to describe what you believe Great Britain should be, Baroness.
I think Britain can be very innovative. Its strength is being eccentric.
Okay, that's 2 words.
With enormous potential.
Okay, that's 3 words.
So rather like Singapore on the Thames, I think it should
All
really
right.
open up to the rest of the world, connect in all sorts of ways, as Singapore does.
Tristram?
Generous.
Okay.
2 words, global centre.
All right, let's give them a huge round of applause.